Good evening, Florida House Minority Leader Fentress Driskell here. Thank you for joining us on another edition of the Driskell Debrief, our weekly live streams where we bring you the latest in Florida politics and we just check in with this community that we've been building. So what's new with you? I'll tell you what's new with me. New hair, who this? Yeah, this is my natural hair, which is a real passion for me. And sometimes we ladies have to switch it up a little bit. I think about natural hair every year in the legislature. I've been honored to either carry or find a way to support the Crown Act, which would make sure that our young people are protected in schools when they show up with their protected hairstyles, or they show up with hairstyles that maybe are thought of as non-traditional. I'm a big believer that people should be able to show up fully as who they are, and they should not be penalized for that. And so that's why I support the Crown Act, which is all about natural hair. And you can see me with my natural hair in this protective style. So yeah, this is what's new with me this week. There's so much to get into tonight. And because we have such a fantastic program, I'm honestly just going to jump right into it. We have some fantastic guests tonight. We're going to talk about Amendment 3, which is all about the adult use of marijuana. In Florida, I think it is incredible that we're going to have this on the ballot because people feel passionately about this issue. And it's one opportunity to let the voters decide their own fate, which we know is important in Florida, given that we have a legislature that, let's just say, sometimes does not listen to the will of the people. So let me tell you about our guests so we can jump into this conversation. My first guest actually is Gary Stein. Gary is the political director of Suncoast NORML, which is a 501c4 dedicated to the legalization of cannabis. He received a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in the Health Education and Health Policy. He's the founder of the Clarity PAC, the very first nonpartisan political action committee dedicated to pro-cannabis policy. He has worked as an advocate, activist, and consultant on issues of health and health equity, including Medicaid expansion, Lord knows we need that, needle exchange programs, gun violence, and increased access to healthcare. And he continues to advocate and organize for issues regarding access to medical cannabis, hemp production, and the responsible adult use of cannabis. He's an established journalist and blogger, having written for the Huffington Post Context Florida, Health News Florida, and Florida Politics. Gary also helped to push for the Compassionate Care Act, or the Charlotte Webb Act, which was the first bill that got passed in Florida to help write the rules, and has been a tireless advocate for continued expanding access for medical cannabis in the state, including the push to pass Amendment 2, the writing of the implementation law, and the fight to correct the glitches of the implementation bill. He is the co-host of the Rotation podcast, which is live streamed every Sunday morning. Please welcome to our stage, Gary Stein. Hi, Gary.
There we go. Hi, how you doing, Fentress? How are you doing? I'm sorry, leader. How would you prefer to be called? Leader Driskell?
Your Majesty? I don't know. Leader Driskell is fine. We're friends. Fentress is fine. I'm just so delighted to have you on tonight. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be on. I mean, this is a very exciting time for us. And when we can actually see some progress.
That's right.
It's give and take. We're looking forward to making things happen.
That's right. So let me tell our viewers about our second guest, Jody James. Jody is the president of the Florida Cannabis Action Network. She is a respected speaker, teacher, and strategic planner, and she has dedicated over 3 decades to shaping cannabis policy. That's right, folks. She started this work when she was only 3 years old. Her journey began in 1996 when she volunteered as a patient advocate, leveraging her decades of business experience to drive change in marijuana laws. Jody's unwavering commitment helped patients secure medical necessity through legal channels, while also building a statewide constituency that continues to influence lawmakers like me. Her expertise extends nationally, including speaking at the National NORML Conference, Marijuana Policy Project conferences, Students for Sensible Drug Policies conferences, political and the Patients Out of Time conferences on cannabis therapeutics. She has been featured at international events hosted by the Drug Policy Alliance and Mensa. In Florida, Jody's engaging style wisdom, and experience have resonated with audiences from the Panhandle to the Keys. Jody James stands as a beacon of advocacy, bridging knowledge, compassion, and humor to create a more informed and compassionate approach to cannabis policy in Florida and beyond. Let's bring to the stage the wonderful Jody James. Hi, Jody.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Good to see you both.
Good to see you too. So let's start with you, Jody. Would you tell us a little about your organization and what it does?
So, Florida Cannabis Action Network has been the voice of the consumer for more than 25 years. When we first started working on this, the major push was just to have the right to speak about cannabis. Over the decades, we've helped people understand how to use cannabis, why they use cannabis, and help people change the law. Of course, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are protecting patients and getting better access to medicine, increasing safety and safety protocols to make sure that the public is safe, and giving people back the plant, which of course is one of our main objectives.
Thank you for that. And Gary, why don't you tell us a little bit about Suncoast Normal?
Suncoast Normal is the most politically active normal chapter. I have to put that in there. I'm like, Jody, how did you get those plants to grow so big? I'm just wondering. But anyway,
I work with experts.
There we go. And I joined Suncoast Normal just about a decade ago now, after I got tired of fighting for Medicaid expansion, because I saw it just wasn't going to happen in Florida in that current political atmosphere. So I decided to go after something else that wasn't going to happen in that political atmosphere, which was medical cannabis. But I happened to see this young lady by the name of Kathy Jordan, who for some odd reason happened to have ALS for 35 years. Actually, it was about 32 years at the time. And that was actually so incredible to me as somebody who came from the health field, because I have a master's in public health and I worked for the Centers for Disease Control for 2 decades. And I never saw a medication that was even close to allowing anybody with ALS to live more than 5 years. I said, something must be going on here. So I did a paradigm shift and went ahead and started investigating the plant and seeing just how great medicinal use could be. And so I joined Suncoast Normal, and we continue to move forward, and we continue to tweak the legislature in a way that educates to legislate and try to make these things work in a state which oftentimes can be tough to work.
It can be tough to work. So let's stick with that, Gary. Talk about your advocacy efforts as it relates both to the public, but then also to lawmakers.
Again, one of the things that we do as somebody who's not a lobbyist, not paid for by anything, we go ahead and we educate to legislate. And that means basically giving the legislators the education they need to be able to understand the topic and move forward to make certain it's implemented in the proper direction. And for that matter, I have been writing several bills over the last couple of years and tried desperately to get them into the hands of legislators who are willing to file them and move them forward. Some never went forward yet, but they're continuing to go on. You filed the bill, one bill of mine this last session, which was giving people protections for parental rights, which means if you are using cannabis as a parent, that the CPS cannot come over and take your kids away just because of that you're using a medical medicine, which actually might make you a better parent in the first place. And there's no reason for it to be a situation where they'll take your kids away. But there are so many other things that have not been approached by policy in the state of Florida, including employee protection. Right now, you can still lose your job or not get a job because of that you're using cannabis as a medical patient. You might be able to be kicked out of a hospital or a ALF for using medical cannabis, or you might be kicked off of a transplant list for using medical cannabis. None of these things are necessary to happen because these are all remnants of a 80-year-old prohibition, which has really used up its welcome. And we also have other things like, for instance, reciprocity. Now, reciprocity might just be resolved by this new amendment if it goes through, and we can discuss that later on. But right now, we have all these people who come to Florida as vacationers. Some people come on vacation and leave on probation. It's just a fact. If people come there bringing their medicine with them so they can have a good time on their vacation, we have grandmothers who are trying to sneak it through TSA. And this is what's happening on right now. And there's no reason for it. Here in one of the vacation capitals of the world, that Florida would have this barrier to their people. And of course, we need to expand the number of qualifying conditions. And especially if you can make it that big, home grow would be very important for people to be able to have. Now, I know the legislature is very tough on home grow because they're worried about what is called diversion, which means they think you're going to grow it and pass it out around the neighborhood. But the actual fact is, if you're growing this as your medicine, you're not going to pass it around. Plus, there are certain people who need certain cultivars or strains, as people sometimes call them. And this would allow them to grow that one particular strain that the big MMTCs will not be growing because it's not profitable for them to put their effort into a boutique strain, which might not bring on as many sales, but is very important for a particular disease.
So it sounds like we've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. Jody, why don't you tell us about your advocacy?
Well, and I think when Gary talks about some of these things, that's really what we refer to when we're talking about protecting our medical program and making it better. You know, one of the things that concerns my constituency is if we pass Amendment 2 or when we pass Amendment 2, what happens to the patient? And as we have seen in 30 states as they have moved from medical marijuana to recreational or personal non-medical use, those kinds of questions end up in the hands of the legislature. And that's one of the reasons why Florida Cannabis Action Network is making sure that our constituency is engaged, that they have registered to vote, that they've double checked their voter registration. 1 million people were removed from the voter rolls. Some of our constituency has had a life-changing illness since the last time they voted. And maybe their handwriting's not quite the same. And we've seen people have their ballot access denied because their handwriting didn't match on their absentee ballot. So we want to make sure people who may have had a life-changing incident get re-registered to vote. And this year, we're taking it a step further. If you're ready to run, we're ready to help you run for office. We don't want you to run for the hills or run for Georgia. We want you to run for office because when Amendment 3 passes, we want to be in a position to have people in office that are going to implement it in a way that lots of people can participate in the marketplace. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. We want to make sure that at the end of the day, consumers are safe. And the way we do that is we get people engaged right now to be at the polls between now and November.
That's right. And, you know, a big thing that we try to do on this show is to advocate for people to be informed so that they can feel empowered, so they can then go and participate. But let's talk about maybe what keeps you empowered to keep going, because Florida, like you both mentioned, can be a challenging place to get things done in the legislature. Jody, what keeps you motivated? What keeps you going and working in this line of work in this field?
It is really simple. I can't go anywhere and mention working on cannabis policy without hearing a life-changing, life-altering story. And that is day in and day out. Kathy Jordan, who Gary mentioned earlier, has been one of my best friends for almost 30 years. She was a past president of Florida Cannabis Action Network. And the first bill that was introduced in the Florida legislature since 1978 that was a pro-cannabis bill had her name on it. When I walked into T-Mobile, a little brand shout out, to get my phone last week, and the young man saw something in my paperwork that said Florida Cannabis Action Network, and he asked me about it. He started to tell me the story about how he got his card and why he got his card and what cannabis is doing for him. And that's day in and day out. So I know this is something that if we can get past the politics, we can bring health and better healing to people. And that's a righteous calling. Now, it doesn't hurt that it's fun because, you know, well, it is cannabis. And it certainly has been exciting to be where I would say is the front line of the war on drugs. There is no place in the United States where the war on drugs has been fought in quite the same way as it has been fought right here in Florida. And I've had a front row seat to that for nearly 3 decades.
Yeah. And I mean, Gary, what keeps you going? Because the progress has been a little slow moving.
It has, but I see the end game, and that
Right.
is for people to get a access to a medication, which, as Jody said, is life changing. My wife lost her eyesight in part to glaucoma. Now, had she had access to not necessarily THC, but THG and I mean CBD and CBG,
CBD,
those
CBN.
yeah, those are two cannabinoids you don't hear a lot about. The fact is, they actually lower interocular pressure, and they could have saved her eyesight.
Oh,
But it was not legal in Florida, and the knowledge of just these cannabinoids was not spreading because, again, the legality on the federal side made research difficult and moving on. And of course, we talked about Kathy Jordan. I am certain that if Joe Biden came to town and he got a chance to sit down, he met her once in a rope line, right, Jody? But that wasn't really much of
She was
a
actually his wife's hairdresser. They're
yeah.
intimately
Actually,
acquainted.
his first wife's
She worked
hairdresser
on his
in
she worked
Castleberry,
on his first
Delaware.
house she worked on his first house campaign in Delaware. He
wow.
absolutely remembered her in a rope line.
And for him to understand that the oldest living ALS patient in the country is that way because of this particular plant, which he's not totally on board with yet, unfortunately, and could also possibly be that moonshot he was talking about in regards to helping cancer patients, then he might just change his mind about a lot of things. And so we're hoping that we can get these stories out to him and to all the other legislators who could possibly make this happen. And of course, I worked for the Centers for Disease Control. I tracked HIV for a good portion of 2 decades. And I was giving out AZT at the time, which was causing liver damage and things of that sort because it was all we had. And little did we know there was a drug that was there 2,000 years prior to that that actually does help people with HIV live a normal life.
Well, Gary, and pardon me, leader, but this is part of the reason why I talk so much about who's going to be in charge of the implementation. Because and that's why once Amendment 3 passes, we have to make sure that we have lawmakers in place that are going to implement it in such a way that the rules are going to allow people to use it, that are going to protect people's access. I liked what you said about your hair and the Crown Act and allowing people to kind of be who they are.
Not my
Reason
okay.
No, but part of the reason that a lot of people don't know a whole lot about the cannabis community is because for decades we couldn't be vocal, we couldn't be out there, we couldn't be talking about those things because of threats. And as we go into implementation for Amendment 3, we want to make sure that we're taking away as many barriers as possible to access while putting in the right kind of guardrails to protect public safety. And that's going to be all about implementation. But, everybody can find a better wellness by putting this product, this plant, into their lives somehow, whether it's your skin cream that's going to be a little bit better, or hemp oil that's going to help your joints, CBD that's going to reduce inflammation in your body, or someone who's sick that might need stronger products, or someone who just wants to relax in the evening at home for that personal non-medical use, and now they're not going to have to be afraid. And those are kind of the culmination of the things that I've wanted to see for 25 years. I think this is a very exciting time, but only if we put the right people in place.
Yeah. And so thank you for uplifting that. And thank you too, Gary, for your vulnerability and sharing your wife's story. Thank you both for sharing Kathy's story. I'm a big believer in stories, and that our theory of the case in this space that we've created online is that if we start sharing our stories with one another, we'll start to realize the ways that these policies impact us. Because a disease doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat, doesn't care if you're an independent, right? Life impacts us all. These policies impact us all. And I think if we start sharing our stories, we will realize that we have so much more in common, whether we're in the Panhandle or Central Florida or down in the Keys. So we've talked a lot about Amendment 3 tonight, but let's talk about what it means. So let's start with you, Gary, in your own words, talk about what Amendment 3 means and what it would do.
Well, first and foremost, it's going to reduce the number of arrests for use in the state of Florida, which will help because it'll raise the amount that you could actually own, which up to 3 ounces. Although I really don't know at this point in time how they're going to enforce that, other than assume that that's the limit you can be carrying with you at the time, as opposed to how much you actually own, which is what we have right now with the medical use. And I see I see a few problems with the bill, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The fact is, we also have a situation where if someone has concentrate up to 5 grams, right now you could, if you had one vape pen on yourself right now, you have a felony on your hands. So a lot of people have gone to jail because of this fact, and it would fix the reciprocity problem. I mean, my mother used this medically when she had breast cancer. The cancer did get reduced. The tumors were down to 1/4 of a millimeter, 1/4 of a centimeter. She went to visit my sister in Chicago, where they didn't have, where her card was no longer good because she was from Michigan. They took her medicine away from her at Drake Hospital, and she passed away there. It metastasized, and she passed away in Illinois because she lost the access to the medicine that was actually working for her cancer. So again, taking the reciprocity as an issue, that'll go away with the Amendment 3. So that's a good part.
Yeah, that is good. And I'm so sorry about your mom. Like that is awful. I mean, Jody, anything to add about what Amendment 3 would do?
Well, I think Gary covered it. I mean, that's the part that I like the most, is that we can cut down on the number of arrests. And as Gary pointed out, what has become very commonplace in concentrates has also raised our felony count. I think that's probably the number one reason that we're supporting Amendment 3, is we understand that this is going to give all adults who want personal non-medical use to amounts of cannabis access to it. And we are very excited about the opportunity to get people out to vote. I think that's going to be exciting too.
What are your top 3 arguments when you're talking to people out in the public about why they should support Amendment 3?
Number one for us is always, we're going to reduce the number of adults who are arrested. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely number one. And I don't know that I get a whole lot further, because anybody who gives me an argument after that, I say, exactly how many people do you want to have arrested for a plant? So Gary, do you have more than one argument on why we should vote yes for this? Is there a better one than that we will stop arresting adults
for being adults? Because I mean, as much as we talk about medical use, I say, and other people have said, that all cannabis use is medicinal, if only just to de-stress. But right now, they're trying to define what a patient actually is at the level of the Board of Medicine. And they actually chastise doctors for trying to expand their list of patients by saying, yes, what you have is kind of like PTSD, which is one of the 10 qualifying diseases, but you actually have chronic anxiety, which is not one of the actual diseases. And so therefore, you kind of fit. And these people are actually putting their medical licenses on the line for saying that, because the Board of Medicine can come back and say, that's a little too much of a medical gymnastics for this to be true. The fact is, this still allows you to be able to use this product in a non-medical fashion, just like it would be if you want to have a beer. What is so wrong with having a beer, as long as you're not over imbibing that kind of situation? People should be free to be able to use the plant in a personal basis. It's a very social act, actually.
Personal freedom is one of the arguments that I've heard. I mean, I've also heard that this could have significant impact on Florida's economy, potentially a positive impact. Do you want to talk about that, Gary? Like, what do you see as the impact on the economy? And then, Jody, if you have anything to add.
Well, again, first off, just the fact that we have people who come into the state and are able to get a product which is safe and not off the black market, and they will actually be having to pay taxes, which will go towards the state. Now, I think a lot of these tax forms across the country get pretty obtuse. Like, for instance, in Colorado and Wyoming, it was at 36% at one point in time when you had the excise tax and the ad valorem taxes, and it really does raise the price of the product itself. And so some people actually reduce the value of the product so they can kind of keep it even, or they just raise the price and everybody just pays it. But that money can go towards good programs across the state. It can even pay for Visit Florida, for goodness sakes.
Mm.
So, God bless Gary. And I feel like I feel like I'm beating the same horse, though. One of the things that we learned, and I've been doing this long enough that I've watched and consulted with many states as they have moved forward with these programs. And it is really, the devil is in the details. Will this have a positive effect on our economy? It entirely depends on how we implement it. If we create a program that is so taxed that adults don't see any point in entering the market, then you could very well have failing businesses, and not have people coming out of the black market, which should be the objective of something like this. I was in New York at an international drug policy conference, and he was the city manager for Seattle, was on the opening plenary, and he said, when your state does medical marijuana, he believed that they should also do personal adult use, lest we leave anybody outside the rule of law. And, that's a huge statement. But if we overtax, then people are going to stay on the black market. If we are passing bills like we saw introduced this last year that reduces the amount of places where these businesses can be housed, then people aren't going to have access. If you cut into who can participate into the marketplace, again, people want a piece of this pie. They want to be able to sell cannabis. They want to have licenses. If those things don't manifest, it's not going to be a huge bonus to our economy. And while taxes are a benefit, over taxation just sends people right back to the black market.
Yeah,
so
the product is too high. You go someplace where it's cheaper, and it may be a place where there's a gym shoe hanging from the wire up above you. That kind of situation.
As the case may be.
Yeah.
We also want to, we want to make the product safe, but you can't create a mechanism where the product is so expensive to create safely because of testing or 1,000 cameras in the grow and some of the things that we've created when it comes to the medical marijuana program. Some of the hoops that these folks are jumping through just to comply, and they recognize they're making medicine. They're going to create a medical product, but we have created statutory rules that just raise the price. I was in the diamond industry before coming to Florida, so I understand a highly regulated industry with a profit margin and a product that is divertible. I get that. We had ways in the diamond store that I worked for of making sure that those kind of things didn't happen, that diversion didn't happen, and that we knew where our product was being tracked, and we really didn't need legislation to tell us how to protect our product. So we need to be careful when we build these rules to make sure that people have safe access, that the public is protected, and that the industry can flourish.
Well, I'm so grateful that you continue to talk about implementation because, so for the audience who's watching, a constitutional amendment can pass through a ballot initiative, but then it gets kicked to the legislature to write the laws that implement the will of the people. And what we've seen, unfortunately, in Tallahassee is a resistance to do that, a resistance to implement laws that actually reflect the will of the people. So in 2018, we had Amendment 4, which restored returning citizens with their right to vote, folks who had been formerly convicted of felonies. The people overwhelmingly said, yes, this is what we want. And then the legislature implemented laws that really undid that. Now, my caucus and I led the way in pushing back against that and saying, no, we should stick with the will of the people. So what Jody suggests is on point, which is that it won't be enough just to vote in favor of this amendment if that's what you want to do. You also have to continue to vote down the ballot and up the ballot and make sure that you are electing lawmakers who reflect your values. So, Jody, a lot of your work has also had an emphasis on the versatility of hemp. Can you talk to us about what the quote, cannabis is like corn, means to you?
Well, one of the things that I have been striving for my entire adult life is parity. Parity is equal. When you look at corn, and I once called, probably 20 years ago, I called the Department of Ag and I said, if I want to make a new product out of corn, how is that going to be regulated? And the little lady said, well, it all depends on what you want to make out of it. Right now, if you think about corn, corn is a food product, right? We eat corn. Corn is a food supplement. We make corn oil and we add corn oil to products. Corn is a fuel. We make biofuels out of it. Corn is an intoxicant. We make corn mash out of corn. So all of these products that we make with corn are also things that we can do with cannabis hemp. It's a mild intoxicant, just like your corn mash. Working hemp and the oil from the seeds from this plant can have industrial uses that replace some of our traditional fossil fuel uses. It's a biofuel. It is a resin that we can use to in our 3D printers. It is a fiber that we can add to concrete to build our homes. And all of these things can't be done as long as we treat corn differently than we treat cannabis.
Exactly. So, hemp has no infrastructure for industrial use here in the state of Florida, but corn does. The various machines that are required to break down the fiber of the bark to turn it into clothing and textiles or paper, none of these things are available to the hemp farmers. So all they're doing is cutting off the top 1 foot, using that for CBD products and other products, and the rest of it's going to waste.
Right. So we are trying to help people understand the difference between the low THC hemp products that they're seeing advertised on the store and what we call working hemp or industrial hemp. And those industrial hemp would be a fiber industry. And that's pretty exciting. When you want to talk about bringing back jobs to our country, if anybody knows anything about working in concrete, concrete's a very heavy material, right? You pour all these heavy and you put it in this big machine that has a big heavy duty, and it's really heavy. Well, when they were making hemp, the hempcrete is very light, and you need a big drum, and it takes smaller mechanisms. Well, the reason I say that is because I'm from Ohio, and the people who make those machines, those machinists, when machinists work, everybody works in the economy. We knew as a waitress at the Waffle House that when the machinists were working, it meant that General Motors was ordering new equipment. And when General Motors was ordering more equipment, Delco Brakes had more jobs. And so when I think of hemp, I certainly don't think about the stores that are selling low THC or hemp-derived recreational products. I think about the 13 machinists that are going to have a job taking it from the field, turning it into fiber. I think about the fact that we'll be able to grow acres of hemp next to refineries where we can refine the oil and use that in situ. And those are jobs in that community. So that's a sexy future that isn't given over. After the 2000, everybody was a little scared. And we did a project called Hemp's Role in a Sustainable Future. And we talked about how you can remediate the water with hemp. And we,
You mean water quality? Really?
Water quality, because everybody wants a future with clean water. And hemp for water has been holding up that program for 10 years now, and we have the science to prove what ancient wisdom we knew. Thanks to South Florida College, we can measure the amount of phosphates that we're removing from our waterways. That's sexy. Who doesn't want a future with clean water?
And we certainly want a future with jobs, and we certainly want a future with equality and equity for all. So this next question, Black Americans, we see that Black Americans are arrested at a rate of nearly 4 times their white counterparts for possession of cannabis, even though the rates of usage between both groups is roughly the same. So what do we think about Amendment 3 and how it can bring justice to our minority communities? What will Amendment 3 mean for this? Gary, you want to take a crack at this first?
Yeah, I mean, because of the fact that you could actually be carrying up to 3 ounces of a flower or 5 grams of concentrate and not be charged with a felony, that definitely helps if you get pulled over for a cracked red light, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of situation has been going on for on and on. But the other situation we have to deal with right now is there are still laws on the books in regards to public use that only allow you to use cannabis in a private home that you own or you have permission from the owner in order to use it at that facility. And now that they've taken it out of the drug rehab facilities as well, which is a shame because of the fact that cannabis can be used to remediate opioid dependency.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you do it if it's banned from those facilities? So these kind of things are part of the issues we have to deal with as far as the legislature changing the rules and regulations. Because if you have no place to use the product, you're going to go someplace where you think you can,
Mm-hmm.
and oftentimes that will be places where you'll get arrested.
Right.
And
then for you, Jody, because we've talked a lot about voter turnout tonight, I read a poll saying that the youth voting bloc, including Democrats and Republicans, so this is, across the board, the youth voting bloc showed an approval rate of 71% for legalizing marijuana for adult use and for medically nationwide. Do you think an amendment like Amendment 3 could drive youth voters to the polls at a higher rate that we've seen in the past? And if so, what must we do? What steps must we take in order to make that a reality?
Well, protecting people's right to vote at the end of the day, making sure that every precinct is a safe precinct, making sure that voters aren't being intimidated away from the polls, and making sure that the polls are open when people need to be there. We've seen reduction in voting hours. We've seen a crackdown on absentee ballots. But yeah, I think the campuses are going to absolutely be abuzz, and I did mean that as a double entendre, when it comes to this issue. And, when it comes to fairness and equity in the Black community, I really hope to see minorities getting out. We have a committee that is working with us that's doing gas talk, because I didn't know that if you were in some of the Black communities and you were talking about cannabis, you use the term gas. Who knew? So when I go and talk about cannabis to these folks, they're like, no. But the folks within our organization, they understand. They're going to get out there. We have minorities that are going to be talking to minorities in a language they understand, and making sure that everybody's coming to the table on this. Cannabis is a big tent. I'm happy to represent the Democratic wing of the Florida Cannabis Action Network. But we have a libertarian wing, and we have a green wing, and we have a Republican wing. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's going to take that big tent. It's going to take a lot of people who are serious about overcoming some of the real harms of the last 100 years of prohibition. And no place has been harmed more than the African American minority communities. Poor Black and brown people have bear the brunt of this. I worked with law enforcement against prohibition for a long time. And they used to say that the only way that we could really do this was to take away the club that they've been beating us with. And prohibition is the club they've been beating us with. And I'm hoping that Amendment 3 takes that club away from law enforcement and allows people to start using this. But, Gary, you were sounding a lot like it's only going to be better if we implement it right.
That is true. We have to implement it right in a number of ways, and that includes allowing people of minority status to be able to participate in the industry and not just be consumers. Because right now we've been very bad as far as social equity is concerned here in the state of Florida. We are still waiting to get the first minority license finally issued, even though it's been almost 2 years since the applications were put out. It's still being fought in the courts, and it's probably not going to end up very well. It's probably that first license is probably going to get sold to a non-minority entity as soon as it hits the market, because that is the way that they set up the market to make it difficult for folks who don't already have a couple $1 million in their back pocket to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
Vertical integration has got to go. Being vertically integrated should be a choice, not a requirement by law. It doesn't allow for people to specialize. And as we move into personal non-medical use, we'll have different concerns. And we want to make sure that, again, everybody has an opportunity to participate. And that means small businessmen and women, small craft cultivators. I don't want to wait 100 years to have craft cannabis like we had to wait 100 years to have craft beer.
Well, thank you both for uplifting those points about the Black community. And thank you for providing our audience with a little insight into what it's like for the industry. Because if folks don't know, in order to grow cannabis for medical use, you have to have a license from the state. And it's been tough to get them. It's been tough for minorities, especially to get them. That's something I've been honored to work on in legislative session, to try to make sure that we actually live up to the things that we're supposed to do as a state. So let's talk a little bit too about what's coming up in the future. I hear, Mr. Stein, that you have a book coming out. You want to tell us about that?
This has been long in coming, actually. I found myself so busy trying to fix Tallahassee that I didn't have a chance to come home and finish the book that I've been working on for several years, called The Great Green Hope, which is basically talking about how cannabis does affect the lives of people. Mm-hmm. And also how it works, because people often say, I'm not certain how cannabis works, so I'm not going to care about it. But a lot of people are interested in knowing, how does it actually fix cancer? How does it actually fix this particular medical situation? How does it fix Crohn's disease? And what other things are possible? That's what some of the things that we're talking about in the book, the history of it, and then again, how it's affected individual people and how it's bettered their lives.
That's wonderful. Again, I'm a big believer in stories. You let us know when that comes out so we can certainly let our audience know and follow up so that they can check out your book. Please, Jody, I know you have some things coming up for Florida Can later this month. You want to tell us about that?
Work and fun, work-life balance. Coming up online, people can find us on Facebook for Florida Cannabis Action Network. On the 24th, we're going to be doing a program on if you're considering running for office. We're going to have a couple folks in that can talk a little bit about what that might be like. And if you are in the Panhandle area on the 25th of this month, we are doing a coordinates party, and we're going to do some beach cleanup as part of our coordinates party. So we are Hemp for Water, as well as Cannabis Action Network. And while we may not be able to cultivate cannabis plants on waterways to reduce phosphate today, the cannabis community can get together and help clean up our beaches and our waterways. So we'll be doing that in the Panhandle, and folks can follow us all year round. I will point out that it's 420, and if you're in Brevard County, we have an office in Ugali Boulevard and US 1, and we're going to be doing an open house. We will be open at 4 o'clock in case you don't know where you're going to be.
Well, I love that. Well, thank you so much for providing insight and information to our audience. Folks, you've heard it from two individuals who have been in this fight for a number of years, giving you the information that you need to go out and research Amendment 3. This will be on the ballot this November. And so go out, learn more information, and be prepared to vote. And please know that each ballot initiative has to pass by a 60% vote in order for it to take effect. So please, everyone, educate yourselves, be informed. But Gary, Jody, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciated you coming on. Thanks so much.
We'll
We're
do
looking
more
forward to
leadership.
the next slate of legislators, because I know there's going to be a lot of big changes with next session. With Chev Jones now backing out to go ahead and work with the DEC, and Bobby is leaving West Palm to go ahead and go after the commissionership. We have so many of our champions that are going on to their own paths at this point in time. So we have to find champions with new paths, like Tom Keene, who happens to be a member of Suncoast Normal, and who we also helped, along with you guys, of course, in making that campaign happen.
Which we really appreciate it, because we love Rep. Tom Keene. And thank y'all so much for everything you do. Keep it up, because I know we got a long way to November.
Well, if anybody has more questions, we can be available at Leadership Blue.
Lead Blue, see you there. All right, bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, folks. So I hope that you have enjoyed the conversation tonight as much as I have. I know that I've learned some new information. We always like to close out with some calls to action, because getting the information is one thing, putting it to use is entirely another. Please make sure that you are registered to vote. Check your voter registration. Make sure you are registered to vote by mail. Do not take it for granted. You heard Jody mention tonight how many people have been removed from the voting rolls. And my suspicion is that a lot of those people probably don't even know it. And they won't know it until they try to go and vote, and it's too late for them to update their information. We don't want that to happen to you. We want to make sure that however you feel about Amendment 3, that you show up to the polls this November to make your voices heard. And remember, Florida is in play. The president says it. The polls say it. And in November, women in the rest of Florida are going to show it. I believe young people are activated right now. They are paying attention. They are engaged. I think that with Amendment 3 and Amendment 4, we have lanes to talk to voters about the issues that they care about. And so make sure that you are registered to vote. And remember that Florida is in play. Now, I want to tell you about a very special family that I met tonight. And y'all know how I feel about stories and learning people's stories. And a dear friend of mine, Tampa City Councilman Luis Vieira, told me this morning about some constituents in our districts which overlap, who recently lost their son. It's the Hassan family. And tonight we went and visited with Mahmoud and with Carol and Hassan, who were parents to Gabriel. I'll show you Gabriel right here. Gabriel was a student at Wharton High School, which is in our district. A handsome young man. He certainly was a bright light. 17 years old, gave so much to so many. He was a tutor to other students. He was an Eagle Scout. He volunteered for so many different causes in the community and really made a difference in this world. And Gabriel had leukemia. And in the last months of his life, things accelerated really quickly with that disease. And unfortunately, it became clear that Gabriel likely would not make it to live to see his graduation. And so the Hillsborough County School District worked with Gabe's family, worked with Principal Michael Rowan at Wharton High School, and they held a special early graduation for Gabe so that he could graduate high school in his lifetime. And he did just that. He graduated in January with a GPA of 4.7. Let me tell you, this kid had a brain on him, super smart and super hardworking. And can you imagine having to do your schoolwork all the while you're receiving chemotherapy and blood transfusions? It was not easy for Gabe or for his family, but they never lost that ability to feel that optimism and to feel that hope that Gabe's life, in fact, mattered and that his legacy would go on to impact so many. And so even though they're still processing their own grief and their own trauma over the loss of Gabe, they also are paying it forward in his memory and in his honor. They are engaging the community and trying to improve the lives of others. I just love that. I just love that. It's beautiful to me. It's so powerful. It's so strong. But now they need our help. On Saturday, May 10th, or Friday, May 10th, which would have been Gabriel's 18th birthday, they are holding a blood drive. They are holding a blood drive because they know how important it was that people were willing to give their blood. And that is what allowed Gabriel to have blood transfusions, which started out, maybe once a week, and then it progressed to multiple times a week. And then he had to have these daily. But these blood transfusions absolutely prolonged his life. And it's part of what allowed Gabe to live long enough to graduate from high school. And so it will be held on May 10th from noon to 4 p.m. For those of you who are in the Hillsborough County area or in the Tampa Bay area, I would love for you to come out. It will be held at the mosque that is located here in the New Tampa area. We will include a link to that in the chat so that you can click on the link and get the information about this. And we'll also make sure, I think we can post the link in the bio so that you can get information about it there as well. But I would love for you to join me in honoring a bright life in this world, a bright candle that unfortunately was extinguished too soon, Mr. Gabriel Mahmoud Hassan, who was just an incredible inspiration to his peers, to his teachers, to his entire community, to his family, and now to me. And I look forward to seeing you all there on May 10th. We'll try to uplift this again so that we could be supportive of the Hassan family, but we certainly want to pay it forward and allow them to achieve their dream of keeping Gabriel's legacy alive. So that's all we have for you tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. I enjoy this space. I look forward to spending this time with you each week. It means so much to me. I can have a bad day. I can have like a hard day that was super busy and like really taxing, and I can be exhausted. And then on Tuesday nights, I get to come and be with you and to share with you about the things that are on my mind. I get to hear from you in the chat. Brian Stewart, good to see you from Hernando County. Thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. So hopefully we will get to see you all here at the same time next week. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you then.